All right, I'm going to talk about big government versus small government. So there's this argument out there that if a federal government passes a law, that is an example of big government, and if a state or local government passes a law, that's an example of small government. This is a fallacious argument, okay, because it doesn't take into account the nature of that law. What actually defines a big government policy is the infringement on individual rights, okay? And what defines a small government policy is the granting of specific individual rights. So, in reality, say for example, you take some of these states that are banning CRT, critical race theory, they're banning books that teach critical race theory. This is an example of big government, okay? Just because it's coming from a state does not mean that it's an example of small government, okay? It's infringing on the First Amendment. It's infringing on individual rights. So in this case, it is the responsibility of the federal government to step in and specifically grant the right to books that teach CRT. And if we take another scenario, say for example, the federal government is looking to pass this Restrict Act. Now, what is the Restrict Act? It basically enables the federal government to prosecute you for what you say online. And what that really means is if they don't like what you say online, they're going to try to silence you. And that gives them, that's an infringement on the First Amendment. So in this case, that's an example of big government. And it is the job of local or state governments to specifically grant basically an immunity to the Restrict Act in order to preserve the individual rights again. So this dynamic between federal, state, and local governments, it's basically a checks and balances system. Okay, if a government restricts an individual right, any federal, state, or local, it's the job of the other two to specifically grant that right in order to preserve the individual rights. So what I mean to say here is that whether or not a law is an example of big or small government is dependent on whether that law protects or restricts individual rights. Okay, it all comes down to individual rights. And in effect, a federal government can only remain as libertarian as the most radical state or local government remains libertarian, okay? If a state or local government passes an authoritarian policy that infringes on individual rights, then the federal government must step in to specifically grant those rights, okay? And vice versa. Say, for example, the federal government bans marijuana use. It's the responsibility of the state and local governments to specifically grant that individual right. Now, marijuana is banned federally, right? Say, for example, a red state has 60% of the people that still want marijuana banned. This is an example of big government, okay? This is an example of an authoritarian policy. When we allow a majority to infringe on an individual right, we are slipping into authoritarianism, okay? We're allowing the 60% to control the individual rights of the 40%. This is a very slippery slope, okay? This is how we devolve into fascism. So I just want you to think about that. Thanks for watching.